Infinite word again, huh? So I just gave you another question with essentially the same answer. Okay? In open circuit, the resistance is infinite. Okay, back to this optic sensor thing that I was talking about earlier. Optic sensor uses 4 wires. They have a positive input. They have a negative input, they have a high data rate, and they have a low data rate. 4 wires. Okay. Positive, negative, high data rate, low data rate. Optic sensor. Where is the oxygen sensor located in the exhaust? It's close to the catalytic converter.
There's like one in the exhaust manifold before and one after.
The forward oxygen sensor has to be as close to the exhaust manifold as possible to get up to 600 degrees. So it needs to be as close to the exhaust manifold without, and sometimes it's in the exhaust manifold to do that. It has to get up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit.
Actually, Pontiac had the issue with the sensor actually in there.
In the exhaust manifold.
Was it 400 degrees then?
600 degrees Fahrenheit. If you have a post O2 sensor, that's going to be right after the catalytic converter. And the only reason it's there is to tell you about the catalytic converter. If I was talking about the ideal air-fuel mixture ratio, what would that be? 14.7 to 1. I'm going to give you pictures of an NPN transistor and a PNP transistor on this. You're going to have to identify that. In some of our discussion and also in your book, it talks about excessive resistance in a secondary ignition circuit. You can go and look those up, okay? There's probably 6 or 7 items on that page. Excessive resistance in the secondary ignition circuit. So it could be a number of things, anywhere from loose connections on the plug wires to a lean air-fuel mixture to a very large spark plug gap to an open plug wire. So anything that deals with that secondary. If you just know what secondary it is, could be any problem with that. I'm going to ask you the 3 basic secondary scope patterns. This is the place where you do use these words: parade, stacked, and superimpose. If you want to kick in 5 millisecond sweep, that's up to you, but that's a bonus.
What were those 3 again?
Parade, stacked, and superimpose. This is the oscilloscope patterns themselves. So the next question is a transistor question again. What are the 3 transistor terminals on a bipolar junction transistor? What are they? Give me one. Base. What's another one? Collector. Emitter. Okay, you got it. Really difficult stuff here. I'm going to ask you, out of your chapter 30, to pick any three sensors that you had in chapter 30, and I'm going to ask you to tell why that sensor is used. So if you decide to use a coolant temp sensor, then you better be able to say that it's used to enrich the fuel when it's cold and lean it out at operating temperature. You need to be able to say that. If the thermostat's working, any 3. You can do the same thing with the air temp sensor. The other day we had an air temp sensor unplugged on this 93 Pontiac. It didn't want to start. So it must be important. So we plugged it back in and it started. So it must be important. What does it do? So if you choose any 3 of those sensors, mass airflow, oxygen sensor, you want to pick something that is not overly complicated because you have one line to explain it. All right? What is a DLC and how does it function? You guys should be able to go a whole page on that right now. How does it function? After doing this last assignment, you should be able to go a lot of detail because you saw it on every page. What is a DLC? How does it function? I gave you a picture of an electronic ignition system, a real basic one with a big module on it with transistors in it. You remember that? Does anybody not have one of those pictures? Okay, you need one of those, Tim? Okay, make sure I get that. So we might need to make a few extra copies. I'll make, say, 5 or 6 people. I want you to study that, and I want you to use that picture to explain how the trigger circuit interfaces with the transistors, allowing the saturation of the coil. Okay? However you need to draw that. Whenever you do a drawing of any type, you want to try to not just remember it, but also draw it large enough so I can read it. I've seen everybody that I've seen really bad artists turn into miniature artists at that point. And you try to draw it within a square inch right there.
So you want us to draw what?
And the ignition system, electronic ignition system, and how it works.
Electronic ignition system.
I'm going to also get you to draw a secondary pattern. I'm going to get you to draw a secondary pattern and label it. Draw a secondary pattern and label it. And then lastly, I'm going to give you 4 labs, and I will probably start on our day of the final. I will probably stagger the class in half so that we don't get bunched up in our labs so bad. So I'll tell you, as you were all in here, and you'll be in my engine performance, I'll have my final preview 3 hours before the final. I will start a part of the class at an hour and a half before the final, and then another half of the class at the final time. Okay? Those who volunteered and want to take it early are welcome to do that. So the labs will involve coil ignition, so you want to make sure you know the difference between primary and secondary. It will involve a scope presentation, and are the leads now connected properly? I'm going to have an oxygen sensor and just ask you a few questions on an oxygen sensor that are just on the final that we just covered. They're the same questions that now you're just looking at an oxygen sensor. Okay? I'm not asking you to have a running engine, just asking you to look at it. Okay? That's really it. It's not long, but it does involve several things. Any questions for me?
We have our notebooks.
Say that.
I'm assuming.
John will be in here ahead of us, and I'm going to, at 3 hours before the final. What time does it start? 1 to 3. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I will be here. I'm going to go over this one more time, and John can be a part of this. Gather your notes. I'm going to, while that group, the bulk of that group who are here at 10 o'clock, I'm going to say, how many of you want to start early and do your final early? And I'm going to have you step out here, and you'll start with the lab portion first, and then come back in here and continue on. Or actually, I might move you next door. And then the study group can keep on going for another hour and a half. Paul?
We have our notebooks back that we can advance.
I will have all the notebooks finished before the final, and back to you. Yes, sir.
Can I publish this video?
Can you publish it to
YouTube?
Sure. You have my permission? You have my permission. John.
I'm going to use that.
Okay.
You have my permission. I recorded it.
It is not